And I realized,
I've
we're
just said,
live?
no, it's okay. Yeah, but it's okay. Just
Oh,
don't say, you can. You can say something.
oh no, I was just going to say that I realized that I had known about the story that you called me about, and it just there's so many things going on that I like.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. I know. I mean, I know you did because you're in the space, but it's like every time I cycle through the news throughout the day, there's something else. I'm like, okay, I don't. I'm trying to prioritize.
Yeah.
It's all a lot. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna come up in 20 seconds.
Okay.
Oh gosh. Okay. 'Cause it's just a lot. But I really loved your piece, which I did read.
Oh, thank you.
I really love that because
Thank you.
you've seen the athletes at the Olympics, but I'll get into that. Hold on one moment. And hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you. Oh my goodness, had Greg Palast on a little bit earlier as we were talking about protecting the vote. It's a real challenge trying to find which story or stories to cover because so much is happening at one time. What do they say? This is it now. We have the age of Aquarius. Now we've got the Gemini age where things are just changing. And I think it's a good thing. You know, when I was at the National Prayer Breakfast last year, a lot of people were feeling a lot of different ways because most of the audience is from the international community. Indeed, the cardinal who is in charge of canonization delivered the opening prayer. So it was that kind of event, right? And it's a week of events. And you saw how pained, especially the European community, is about where America is right now. And it's there is a lot of upheaval. But as I was talking to the people at my table, because the president was going on and on and on and on, and it made a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. And I said, before anyone says anything negative about him, I said, they often say that we get the leadership that we deserve. I said, well, but it's a little bit deeper than that. We get the leadership who we are. I said, he's holding up a mirror to us, and we don't like what we see. All of the things that he is, we are and have been. Now, the question is, are we going to grow? Are we going to evolve? Evolve. Racism, misogyny, all forms of classism, they're part of who we are. They're part of the human experience. And America is everything. Uh, it is the human experience. Everybody in the world is here. And we're trying to figure it out, like just about any place on earth. That's part of the blessing of this country, really. And I still have a lot of hope that we're going to continue to grow. And so I said to them, let's don't be so hard on him. I said, let's heal ourselves. Let's take this opportunity to grow. Let's do that because we're placing upon him all of our sins without looking at ourselves. The log and the splint in each other's eyes. Well, you know what? Whether it's a log or a splint, you need to get it out. How about that part? So, when Dr. Adrienne Pine, this brilliant anthropologist who now I have to read, she is now the visiting scholar of Latino and Latin American studies um, at UC Riverside. Well, blessings to you, because I mean she was in
Thank you.
Washington the last time I spoke with her, Washington D.C., but she is all over the world, really part of this global resistance on the genocide in Palestine. At the same time, we have got so many issues that we're dealing with at home. We're dealing with ICE. And we are looking at the proliferation of concentration camps. See, they're not prisons. When you're in prison, when you've been in jail, you've at least been charged with a crime or you have been convicted of one. That's prison. That's jail. That's prison. But a detention center The detention centers became concentration camps in Europe in the 20s and 30s and 40s, um, and in the Congo. We lost so many millions of people during the Second World War, of course. 6 million Jews, 50 plus million Russians. Wow. We lost between 10 and 20 million people. King Leopold killed them in the Congo. We just do this. This is what human beings do. So, what about the concentration camps here? What about the Olympic athletes who are speaking out and who are saying, on this world stage, some of the best at what they do, they are taking this opportunity to risk, uh, like Mr. Smith and Mr. Carlos in 1968, they're risking major endorsement deals by saying, I don't feel comfortable with what's happening in my country right now. See, what we're not seeing in the Olympics right now are the protests because ICE are over there. And the Italians don't want them there. The Europeans don't want them there. They don't. So there's just a lot going on. And so I wanted to talk about these concentration camps in the United States. And I wanted to connect it to this global resistance that you are participating in and that you are seeing, Dr. Pine. Welcome back to the show. It's always a joy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me back, Santita. It's great to be here. Well, in terms of the concentration camps, it's really astounding, this network of sort of hidden concentration camps around the country because they're not being particularly public about it. And Trump, because he wants to build so many of them so fast, is deploying the Navy to build some of these. Which is almost neither here nor there. It's just a way of funneling the cash. So there was a recent expose that around $55 billion is being funneled through a Navy contract exclusively for building these concentration camps all around the country. Some of them that are meant to hold over 10,000 people. And these are not facilities that provide any sort of dignified existence for 10,000 people. We're talking about sort of the model of alligator Alcatraz in Florida, temporarily built structures, and they're even talking about biohazard disposal facilities. It sounds terrifyingly like gas chambers in the Holocaust. I mean, the parallels are unmistakable. And as you said, these are not, we can't call them jails or detention centers because really it's an identity crime that people are being sent there for. The identity ostensibly of being a migrant, but really of being Black or brown in this country, because as we have seen with the violent ICE sweeps in Minneapolis, in other states and cities around the country, that people are being arrested regardless of their citizenship status if they are not white, right? And they're being treated with tremendous violence. We also see a few white people being attacked and even killed, which is what makes the news. But of course, we know that far more Latinx and Black migrants have been brutalized, tortured, and killed in what they call migrant detention, which really, again, is concentration camps. So $55 billion to build these concentration camps. Add that to the $70 billion that has been allocated for ICE through 2029, and that making ICE the most highly funded federal force, more than the FBI. What could we do? Like, what kind of healthcare or education or childcare services could we fund with this entirely unnecessary money? There is no need for ICE or for concentration camps, obviously, in this country. They are just plain cruelty. And it's really been incredible, as you know, to see how powerfully Italians have stood up to the violence of this kind of fascism in the United States. I talk to a lot of people around the world every day. I've got friends in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, and and for the past couple weeks, all they have asked me when I call them is, tell me about what's going on in Minneapolis. Like, what else is happening? How are people resisting? How can we support? And I don't think people in and having talked to friends in Minneapolis, labor leaders, community organizers, I realized that they didn't have the sense of the depth of the international solidarity that people are feeling with Minneapolis right now, with the people who are fighting against these fascist forces. And that's precisely because people around the world have been subject to US funded and trained fascist forces, for as long as the US has been the global imperialist power that it has been. And there's this sense of profound solidarity with the people in the US, with migrants, with other people from the US who are fighting against this fascism that people around the world recognize. So thousands of people were out on the streets of Milan, of Italians, were out fighting the fact that ICE was present ostensibly to protect the Olympic athletes. Absurd for a migration organization to be protecting US athletes in Italy, but they were protesting that, and also protesting, making very explicitly making the connections between ICE violence, between the Israeli genocide in Palestine, between the militarization of their own workplaces and the deployment of Israeli developed technologies developed at the expense of Palestinians for monitoring, for security, deployed against them in their workplaces. So they're making these connections of how all of these forces of global fascism and Zionist imperialism are connected, and they're impacting them, and that has manifested in this profound solidarity with the people of Minneapolis, with other people around this country who are also fighting the same monster.
We're talking with Dr. Adrienne Pine, brilliant anthropologist, activist, I would say. And, I think maybe, wouldn't you say that your understanding of who we are as people, as anthropologists, might have a passing familiarity with anthropologists because of Zora Neale Hurston? It's something my sister has like 5 or 6 degrees. One of them is in that. and,
Wonderful.
and, and help me to understand where you think we are as human beings right now. I mean, that might sound very broad, but I really don't. It just feels like there's like this awakening, if you will,
Mhm.
and a crystallizing of a certain understanding. When I look at Alex Pretty and I think of Renee Good, I mean, they didn't have to be out there. And when I saw the fierce energy with which Alex Pretty um, went after ICE 11 days before he was killed.
Yeah.
Because he was actually on his way somewhere, but he saw them going after a family and said, no, 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 no. And this is someone who works with the veterans, right?
Yeah.
And as a nurse, bless his heart. And then he saw ICE knock this woman down. I mean, hit her. And just as a gentleman, he said, what are you doing? And they kill him. I mean, something is going on because it's cold in Minnesota. It's cold up there. But tens of thousands of people are showing up. Hundreds of thousands showed up for the national strike that day in Minneapolis alone. there's something that and when you look at Italy, they have had that turn with fascism. And so maybe other people and because it has been called fascism, they acknowledge that period of their history. Maybe they see something in America that we might not see, Dr. Pine. Is it something that we don't see or we don't recognize?
Well, it's such a good question. And I mean, you started out with anthropology. So I'll just
Yeah.
start out by saying that anthropologists traditionally have looked at local communities and tried to make global connections through a deep understanding of what's happening, what's the culture, what's happening in a local context. But and that's what I certainly started out doing, but there is no escaping the fact that we live in a world of empire. We live in a world that is largely structured by Zionism and imperial violence and militarism. And so we can't ignore that larger factor in understanding how local communities work. Nonetheless, what history shows us is that modern genocides are completely connected with imperialism and capitalism, which are recent phenomena. They're not something that's existed forever. And what history shows us and anthropology shows us is that communities do have a tendency to come together in
Mm.
times of crisis, right? There are plenty of cultural things that can keep us apart and divide us as well. But in this time of crisis, I think something happened, in particular, given that obviously so many people voted for Trump. But what we see now is people suddenly realizing, the people who voted for Trump, that this wasn't what they voted for. They didn't vote for their communities to be ripped apart. They voted for their economy to get better. They voted, but they did not vote for their neighbor to be torn away from their family and sent off to a concentration camp. And there is a fundamental humanity that most people have. Obviously, ICE officers seem to be lacking that. And there are lots of reasons for that we can point to. But in the United States and in communities like Minneapolis, New York, Chicago, everywhere that ICE has gone, what we've seen is a tremendous surge of community organizing, of people coming together in ways that they hadn't necessarily prior to this threat to their community. I think we take community for granted, and in many cases we don't really even have it before the threat comes to us. We have very individualistic way of living in this country, but an attack on your community makes you realize that you need to value that. And that's what we've seen. I mean, people's neighbors who they might not have even been close with suddenly being torn away by ICE has created networks of mutual aid, and people have built on these. People have created all these signal groups so that they will be connected. And through this, I think there's a real potential for awakening and a realization of the connections, that the violence that we've been seeing on our cell phones, that we've been hearing about, quote unquote, over there in Palestine, for example, the kinds of genocide that we are witnessing, the kinds of incredibly violent, brutal kidnapping of Palestinians and their incarceration and their torture. That's happening here now. And they're using the same technologies. They're using Palantir, which is being used by the IDF, right? It's being
Mhm.
used in Israel to monitor Palestinians. They're exporting technologies that have been developed in Palestine, and directly ICE is using them. They're training together. And so I think people today, who are confronting ICE, are realizing that the only way to confront ICE is by recognizing both their community and that they need to come together as communities, but also the global community. And in a piece that I published today in Popular Resistance, I talk about a concept that Palestinian scholar Majid Shihadeh discusses, which is global Israel. And part of that theory is the fact that Israel, in order to maintain its genocidal project of settler colonialism in Palestine, has actively intervened in the affairs of state of countries everywhere in the world. It has sponsored coups to ensure that governments will be put in place that support the genocidal project, the Zionist project in Palestine. It has intervened in almost as many countries as the United States, and exported the technologies that it has perfected in the Palestinian laboratory against Palestinians for repression, for use and repression abroad. And so what Shihadeh says is that there is this entire global process that he calls global Israel, that is connected with the Israeli project in Palestine, and that the only way really that we can resist that is by becoming global Palestine, is by standing in solidarity with each other, with peoples around the world who are fighting for their sovereignty against the violent incursions of the Zionist imperialism of the United States and Israel attacking their sovereignty, like what is happening in Venezuela against Cuba, what was recently averted in Greenland, attacks on Nigeria, all of these sorts of attacks. If we recognize that people who are fighting to protect their communities are fighting to protect their sovereignty, which in effect is what Minneapolis is doing. It's fighting against an invasive force. It's fighting to protect its sovereignty. That we need to realize that we are all connected in that struggle
Oh,
against Zionist imperialism, global Israel, and capitalism itself, because that's what this project is supporting.
have
Sorry,
I
that
don't
was a little
think
all over the place, but
no, I don't think it is all over the place. I think it because we're trying to figure out how ICE doesn't behave like American police. Um, and I think the people in Chicago, which is where I'm based, Minneapolis, which is where my show is based, they have felt occupied, and there has been pushback. And Americans are not cut out for occupation. Of course, we occupied the United States. But that's another story for another time. That having been said, there is a pushback, and I'm just when I look at the Olympic athletes pushing back, um, and they know as they step out on that global stage what they're risking. Um, Maybe they don't know how much they're risking, but they're risking something. But we're not. I'm not there, so I'm not seeing the protests. I don't know what they have to walk through to get to the Olympic Village, or what's just outside of the Olympic Village. I know it's something because there is a massive pushback. If you can stay here I mean, I know you can't stay much longer, but I want to bring on
that's fine.
Attorney Mark Fancher, who's a brilliant attorney and brilliant social critic and civil libertarian. He's done so much tremendous work. This is, of course, Dr. Adrienne Pine, and she is an anthropologist. She's part of the family on this show. That's why I know you like. It's as crazy as we are. You are part of the family here, as is Attorney Fancher. So welcome home once again, Adrienne Pine. And every time I call her, I call at the last minute. I don't know if she's going to be in Washington, D.C., which is where she has been. But now she's a visiting scholar at the Latino and Latin American Studies Center at UC Riverside. And so it is wonderful to have her here. And Attorney Fancher is based in Detroit, but he does national and international work. Um, it's fascinating as you talk about this global Israel project, which we're beginning to hear a little bit about. If you could explain what it is, and I'd love for you to respond to that, Attorney Fancher. What is this? I mean, is it intelligence? Is it a philosophy? What is this?
Well, so the theory itself, as laid out by Palestinian scholar Majid Shihadeh, has many different facets. He talks about the sort of expulsion of Palestinians and the Palestinian diaspora around the world. He talks about the sort of ideological mechanism used by Israel to bring Jews from around the world into this project, even if they don't agree with Zionism, to claim to speak for Judaism around the world, and how that has really internationalized Israel. But most importantly, for my argument in the article that I published today, is the element of Israel intervening in other countries. Economically, militarily, technologically, through training and economic agreements, in order to ensure the continuity of governments that support the Zionist project in Israel. So one example I give in my article, for example, is the tremendous support that Israel provided for the Guatemalan genocide in the 1980s, which, you know, killed so many Mayan people. And that was Rios Montt who carried it out as an evangelical crusade in his mind, with the result being that not only did they kill off a huge portion of the Mayan indigenous population, but they converted the majority of Guatemalans to evangelical Zionist Christianity, ensuring that pro-Israel governments would be elected in the future, quote unquote, democratically. And the person who most supported that project in the United States was Elliot Abrams. He, when I was in the Venezuelan embassy in 2019, when the State Department was trying to take it over on behalf of Juan Guaido, Elliot Abrams, who had supported the Guatemalan genocide and helped connect Rios Montt with Israel, himself became appointed as a special envoy to Venezuela and helped try to facilitate a coup there. It turns out that Maria Corina Machado, who's the Nobel Peace Prize winner who just gave her Nobel to Trump, has long had a formal alliance with the Likud party, with Netanyahu's party, and has stated repeatedly that the fight of Venezuela is the fight of Israel. We see this everywhere in Latin America, everywhere in the world where there is a government, where there's the potential of a leftist or socialist government winning power or remaining in power, their enemies are allied with Israel. And this and Israel will work just as hard as the United States with all of the resources that it has to affect regime change in those places. And so what you have is the development over many decades of infrastructures that involve Israeli training of police, the deployment of Israeli softwares, like Pegasus, or software or technologies like long-range acoustic devices for crowd control that are deployed against protesters. And these things which have long-term impact on countries and reshape them in the mold of Israel in order to support Israel's project against Palestinians. And the counterpoint to that, of course, is that means that the world is facing Israeli violence or Zionist violence on their home turf. It's challenging their sovereignty. It's challenging their human dignity. And there's a potential for global Palestine in all of that, for people from Minneapolis to Venezuela to Cuba to Nigeria to Palestine, and now on in the streets of Italy, to rise up against these unified or connected, intertwined forces of fascism that we see especially evident in the Epstein files. That are really repressing us. Sorry, that was a much longer explanation than I hoped to give.
No. I mean, I think it's important. I mean, Mark is queued up. This is queued up for you, Mark, because, well, I mean, because you're always helping us to see the interconnectedness of it all. And so, as we look at the detention centers, really concentration camps, I mean, because they're being built right before our very eyes, but our eyes are wide shut. We see the Olympic athletes speaking out, up and out. We see the protest. Well, we don't see them. We did not even see NBC refuse to play the booing of the Israeli team as they came in. I mean, they were met with a whew, they were absolutely they were almost booed out of the stadium. It was shocking. And J.D. Vance and his wife Usha, the vice president, and Mrs. Vance, they were greeted with a round of boos. I mean, all of this is happening, and our own press won't report it. You know that. So we have no sense of how we're viewed around the world. So it disconnects us also from the movements on one level, because TikTok has been captured, right? So I'm on upscrolled, everybody. Upscrolled, 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 upscrolled. That's why I'm moving there, everybody. So all you have to do is look for Santita Jackson, my full name. Go to upscrolled and meet me there. Meet me there. Meet me there. Attorney Mark Fancher.
Well, I think that what has been described with respect to global Israel is one component part of global imperialism, global capitalism. Zionism has been its baby and has been very useful for furthering the imperialist cause. And the phenomenon of the globalization of Zionism, imperialism, all of that has been around for quite a while. What has not been around is our recognition of that. The fact that our response to it has always been local. We see local manifestations of this and think that that's the entirety of the problem. We try and organize and strategize around the manifestations of it where we see it, without recognizing that it is a global phenomenon, a global strategy. One of the few people who historically understood it was Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party. And he described it or labeled it as reactionary intercommunalism. And what he explained is that there are players, people who are active in imperialist activity, who form their own little communities in different places around the world. And they coordinate and they collaborate and they make sure that everything that they do operates seamlessly on a global basis. And they have no allegiance to any particular country. In fact, those companies, multinational corporations, which may be based in the United States, really have no allegiance to the United States. There's a joke that's told about how a representative of a multinational corporation was trying to negotiate a contract in a place in the global South. And he came in saying, look, and he starts waving the American flag. He says, I'm a US company and I want to come in and I want to do business with you. And the response was, we hate the United States. And he says, well, who do you like? I got lots of flags because they're just everywhere. And Huey Newton's response to that, he says, if they're going to have reactionary intercommunalism, we ought to have revolutionary intercommunalism, where oppressed people throughout the world are cooperating and collaborating and able to fight them, point for point, wherever it is that they may be, wherever it is that they may show themselves, and that our strategies are coordinated as well to identify their points of vulnerability. And so that if they're particularly weak with respect to this issue or in this place, that globally we all focus on hammering away at that as hard as we can to make sure that they fall, because they are connected. And where they fall in one place, they fall everywhere. And so, yes, this is a very valid and very effective way, I think, of responding to some horrific crimes that have been committed, particularly in Palestine, but we're seeing them all over the place. What they do to Palestinians today, they do in Minnesota tomorrow. And they've already done it to some extent, on an isolated basis, on a micro basis. But if they are not stopped, then we're not far away from full-scale bombings, full major lockdowns of people in concentration camps, and all of the other things that are on the horizon that we're seeing.
What do you make of these concentration camps, these detention centers? Are they detention centers or concentration camps, Mark?
Oh, I mean, let's call it what it is. They're concentration camps in the worst sense of the word. And what's behind them is a frame of mind, a state of mind that is not unlike that which was possessed by those who perpetrated Nazi horrors. And there is a total indifference, totally callous and indifferent, if not hostile, uh, attitude that they have toward people who are going to, in some way, get in the way of their objective. And I think that the objectives vary a little bit depending upon who it is that's perpetrating the crime. Donald Trump, as an individual, has an objective and an approach that is probably a little different from that of some of the multinational corporations and some of the players in the military industrial complex and the Zionists. He has a base that is very race oriented. Donald Trump came to power in the United States using codes that promised that what he was going to do is to make America white again. And his objective specifically is to detain and remove as many people of color as he can. That it drives him, and it's so obvious. I mean, all that you have to do is to see that the immigration efforts, ICE focus, and the targets are all people of color. These are people who are Latino, people who are Haitian, people who are Somalis. They're all the people that he wants to get rid of. And he says that, he doesn't want these people from the S-hole countries. He says that he does want people who come from white countries. He wants people from Norway. He wants white Afrikaners from South Africa. He wants people from Ukraine. He wants people who are white. And this is a very race-driven kind of an agenda and a program that he has. And so when we look at the concentration camps, they are specifically, in his mind, designed for people who are people of color, because that's what he promised his base, and he probably has a personal fondness for the idea himself, as evidenced by his meme of the Obamas that he published. So that's his. I think that very often multinational corporations regard race as a convenient tool or weapon that they use strategically. They're driven by profits, and they will say and do whatever it takes in order for them to maximize their profits, to increase their control of the planet by any means necessary, and doing whatever they have to do in order to do that. And their enemies are not necessarily limited to people of color. Their enemies are anybody that gets in their way. And they can be as white as the snow. If they're enemies, if they're opposed to the agenda of the imperialists, then they're going to catch it too. So it really is a struggle that everybody has to sign on to, if we have any hope for the continuing viability of the planet as a place where we can live with some reasonable degree of peace and decency and humanity. Because otherwise, it is destined for destruction. Imperialists have never cared about the future or what will happen to the planet or what will happen to people. They're only concerned about the bottom line and their profits and how much they can get today, doing whatever it is that they have to do in order to get it.
Detention centers, concentration camps, historically start off targeting one group, but the target expands. Dr. Pine, would you respond to that? And then you, Attorney Fancher, and feel free to jump in. Because I think, when I read that, they're in such a hurry to build these concentration camps, these detention centers, they deployed the Navy to build. I mean, they are just, they are really, they are pushing this through with all deliberate speed. Dr. Pine.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more
I
with
mean,
what Attorney.
how could you see this expanding? I mean, because it's very clear anybody can get shot. I mean, that's what
Yeah, no,
Alex Preddy and Renee Good showed you that. And we see, I mean, and these are the people who we've seen killed. And of course, the majority of the people who have been killed have been people of color. But we're watching white people physically attacked and
yeah, no,
you
and
know,
I think that it's
violently.
unfortunate that it takes that for the kind of outrage that we have seen erupt. Uh, because this has been going on for a long time. My dear friend and comrade Jackie Lookman recently published a piece in Black Agenda Report called Continuity of Social Control from Slave Patrols to Policing to ICE, really laying out so clearly how what we're seeing now is not something different or an aberration, but rather an intensification of something that has been happening a lot for, you know, for the history of this country, really, and has primarily targeted Black and Brown people. But the mechanisms of social control that are being deployed, including ICE violence, but also the technologies that ICE are using. Like Palantir, for example, to monitor not just migrants, but everybody in this country, are really sort of institutionalizing a level of overtly and ideologically fascist control that that required the many decades of sort of buildup of the neoliberal project, which has taken away workers' rights. It's taken away the rights of communities to defend themselves, and it has concentrated power in this sort of Epstein pedophile class, both in the United States and around the world, that as Attorney Fancher mentions, doesn't care really about race, and all they really are interested in is further concentrating their profits and increasing them. And that requires, because that requires violence against broad populations, regardless of race, violence including taking away healthcare, education, infrastructure, everything that that we need as communities. It requires repression. And so that's what we're seeing happen, and that hits all of us, regardless of color, regardless of nationality. It hits us different. The people who have always been more targeted by the history of slave patrols, which is the history of policing and currently ICE, are still going to be targeted more viciously. But yeah, it is expanding, and it's expanding again based in technologies that have been developed for use against Black people in the United States, developed for use against Palestinians in Palestine by the Zionist Israeli government, and I think that the rest of the world has sort of, well, not the rest of the world, but white people in the United States have, not really realized that eventually this is going to come for us as well. And absolutely it is. And I think the most important thing that people need to understand is that this is not a Trump thing. This is a capitalism thing. This is it's bipartisan. Policies of Democrats and Republicans alike have led to this reality. It was Obama who gave, so many contracts to private detention centers to start what eventually is becoming what we're talking about as concentration camps, but have always been concentration camps for the families that have been separated and sent there without committing any sort of crime. And Biden continued Trump's vicious migration policies from his first presidency. Of course, what we're seeing now is heightened, but it's still a continuation. And of course, it's throwing a broader net.
What say you, Mark? Do you see
Well,
this expanding, or, I mean, how, and if so, how do you see it expanding? If not, where do you see this all going?
Well, I think that it's based on observations that Donald Trump has made, and he's been quite astute. He has not been blind to the fact that there have been millions of people turning out for the No Kings rallies. He's not been blind to the fact that people are becoming increasingly militant and more direct in their confrontation of ICE officers. He has watched the reactions to the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, and to a lesser extent Keith Porter. He's aware of all of these things, and he knows that if he is not careful, uh, he is also going to be able to observe that same type of resistance from his own base. And I think he fears that most of all. Increasingly, they're beginning to see the contradictions. Increasingly, they're beginning to voice great disappointment and frustration with him. He is not the person that they expected him to be. He is not delivering on the promises that he's made. Not only is he not delivering on them, but he's doing the exact opposite of what he promised. He promised to, quote unquote, make America first, and he's engaging in the same types of overseas and international kinds of escapades that his predecessors did. He promised that he was going to make the economy better, and he's not doing that. He promised all kinds of things, and he's not delivering, and they're getting increasingly angry. And he knows what happens when they get angry. He just has to look at January 6th, because these people are not to be trifled with. The people of color, the white progressives and the white liberals, they have a culture and a history of civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance, and that type of thing. That MAGA base doesn't play. They will pick up their rifles and they will come for him with an intent to do to him what the MAGA crowd was calling for with respect to Trump's former vice president. And he's desperately afraid of that. And he's preparing to protect himself. And so, with the construction of these concentration camps, when he invokes the Insurrection Act or whatever excuse that he uses in order to totally militarize the country and to put it under martial law, and it's necessary for him to go out and to wholesale round up all of these people who are coming for him, he just needs a place to put them. And these concentration camps, at least as far as he's concerned, will do a perfect job for him. And there's a big question as to whether he will get to the point of being able to use them in the way that he might contemplate using them now. Alligator Alley, or whatever it was that he built, never quite worked out. El Salvador didn't quite work out. And I think that if we resist in the right way and on a mass level, even though they're building these things, it doesn't mean that they're going to populate them.
I have to really ask you all in these last few minutes just how aware we are and what it is that we can do in this moment. I mean, you have been astutely participating in and really observing and writing about this global resistance. You saw when Michael Brown was killed, you saw Palestinian children and activists reaching out to Ferguson, Missouri. They said, wait a minute. I don't even think we knew. They recognized how the police were dealing with them. And they said, this is how you deal with police when they come at you this way. And now we're beginning to hear about where our police are being trained, where ICE are being trained. How we're being surveilled. Just really, a lot is being revealed, and we're watching our social media capture, and yet people are beginning to move past that. They're learning how to speak in code, in social media, and And I'm wondering how far. Well, every action merits an equal and opposite reaction. So the people must be pushing because the oligarchs are beginning to run scared. They're buying up everything. Bless his heart, Netanyahu comes over here every month. I want us to wonder, like, what are you doing? Because nothing is the same. Everything has changed, Dr. Pine and Attorney Fancher. There has been an awakening. And at the same time, now we've got these centers that they are building with intention and with all deliberate speed, as I shared. So what are we going to do? Because our own congressmen and women cannot go in and look at these places. They are co-equal. They are a co-equal branch of government with the executive. They have every right and every obligation to go. A congresswoman from New Jersey was indicted for trying to go in. I mean, so what are we to do? As you write about and speak about and observe this global resistance, Dr. Pine.
Well, I think that we really need to intensify these connections with the global resistance. For one thing, because the opposition to the United States has been, frankly, so weak in multilateral fora that now, with the United Nations General Assembly really failing to act on Palestine last year, what we see is Trump having passed this UN Security Council Resolution 2803, through which he's going to create this so-called Board of Peace that he intends to use to replace the United Nations, taking away all of the power that the Global South has had to stand up to the United States. So this is a key moment, a moment in which Cuba has run out of petroleum. They're canceling flights, or at least one airline announced that as of tomorrow it's canceling flights, and they've just carried out the violent kidnapping of the president of Venezuela, where the U.S. is acting in such illegal ways. But at the same time, we have seen tremendous solidarity from global social movements. We need that solidarity, because without global social movements coming together and challenging the unchecked power of our government, we're not going to be able to challenge that power effectively either, in my opinion. We saw it when Trump was threatening to invade Greenland, that in exactly one day, Denmark sold off its U.S. bonds and managed to tank the stock market, and Trump changed his mind. If global social movements can succeed in pressuring their governments to actually stand up for their own sovereign demands, and if we recognize our connection with global social movements, and think of strategies that connect our struggle with the struggle of the Union Sindacale de Base in Italy, that organized a shutdown of ports, dozens of ports around the Mediterranean on February 6th, and combined that with a protest against ICE in Milan. If we can recognize our connection with those workers and their struggle, who see that connection already, I think there's a chance that we can, confront the kind of fascist violence that we are facing in this country. But because of all the reasons you've mentioned, even Congress members not being able to get into these facilities, having charges filed against them for doing so, there's our only power is in our numbers. And we've seen that we can succeed with that. I mean, Minneapolis and the way that it's risen up has inspired the world, and it has forced Trump to push back on the ICE occupation there. Not enough, but there's tremendous power in our solidarity, and we need to increase that and deepen it as well.
Mark Fancher?
Yeah, I think we have great potential to shut all of this down. Just because of our numbers and because of growing awareness and consciousness. I think the X factor for us is whether the fact that within the most recent decades, the US public has become so spoiled with respect to political struggle, that it no longer has or does not have the mindset or the frame of mind that's necessary in order to carry this through. I mean, in the 60s and the 70s and the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, Black Panther Party and SDS and all, I mean, they would go out and they would face real risks. They would confront power. They would end up in jail. Many of them ended up dead. There was tremendous mental devastation and emotional damage that was done. A heavy price was paid during that period. But in the decades since then, I think for most people, the idea of political struggle is, well, let's make a nice little sign. Let's go out in the street and shout some slogans, and then let's go get ice cream. And I think that, that's a far cry from what's actually going to be required in this moment. And I think to the extent that people are really prepared to go out and to do what I think the people of Minnesota have been doing, just put their bodies on the line and say, look, these are our neighbors. They may not be documented. They may come from a different place. They may not look like you Klans guys who are wearing masks and carrying ICE credentials, but they're our neighbors, and you will not take them. I think the more of that happens on a national basis, not just with respect to ICE, but with respect to this entire agenda, the more likely it is that they're going to back down. We see how easily they fold at the slightest indication of any type of resistance whatsoever. And if people are really on board with this, they will. And I think people just need to tell themselves that it's worth it. The last poets in the 1960s had one of their numbers. The refrain was, "Blessed are those who struggle. Oppression is worse than the grave. It's better to die for a noble cause than to live and die a slave." I mean, if that's our mindset, we win. Ball game.
Well, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. While Black people who were enslaved in the United States sang that song, that is for everyone. Because enslavement can happen to anyone. It first happens in the mind. My father has often said slavery is not the sin, adjusting to it is. And we always push back against the resistors, but resist we must. A woman shouted to Benjamin Franklin after the Constitutional Convention as he walked out. She said, "What kind of government have you given us, sir?" He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Not a democracy, a republic. A republic. What do you want to be? You have to make a decision. And please don't forget Keith Porter, who was shooting a gun in the sky as people do on New Year's Eve, and an off-duty ICE agent, such as the protection they have, felt empowered to leave his or her apartment. I believe it was a man. Leave his apartment and kill him. Kill him. So when you mention Renee Good, when you mention Alex Preddy, put Keith Porter in that. It's three of them of whom we know that they have been killed by ICE agents. One was off duty. Off duty. Think about that. And think about these concentration camps. Pastor Black was shot in his face in here in Chicago, trying to get in. And the ICE agents laughed when they shot him. He said it was rubber bullets, but it could have taken out his eye, could have killed him. Think about that. And they laughed. So we're the ones who have to make the decision. But you know what? Attorney Fancher, Dr. Pine, you make the point. You've got to put your bodies on the line. You have to work. You guys, that's my background. I believe if you're not willing to put it all on the line, then you're not doing the work. It is more than a slogan. It is more than writing something in social media and clicking. It is more than getting into it with people on these social media platforms. You have to get out in these streets and do it nonviolently. When I think of my brother giving this prayer that went viral last week from the National Prayer Breakfast, when people asked him what his inspiration was, he said, my father and Dr. King. He said, I've seen my father go into war zones and free prisoners. He had no bullet, but he had a Bible. We can do it that way, everybody. And in fact, the only way that we're going to heal the land is if we do it with love. But love has strength. Dr. King said you have to have strength to love, and you must be willing to fight. What kind of government do you want? And more than that, what kind of world do you want? Think about that. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. The world that we want is but a thought away. Think about that. Think about it. On earth as it is in heaven. We can have heaven right down here on earth. We have to change our minds and make that happen. I thank you for the work that you do, Dr. Adrian Pine. It is so important. Doctor. Well, you know what we do in the Black community. Everybody's a doctor if you're a great one. I love it. Attorney Roxanne, that's what we do. But I want you to know that I really appreciate what you've been saying. And thank you, Effie Rolfe, my sister in Christ, 2 Chronicles 7:14. Amen to that. Then now saying that Keith Porter was killed by a regular citizen. No. Because he was off duty. They're being technical, I think.
No.
Attorney Fancher.
No.
You're out there in California. He was killed by an ICE agent, yes? Yes. Off duty? Yeah. He was a citizen. They're just not treating us like we're citizens. They're treating us like we have no rights. Think about that, everybody. Because one day it could be any of us or someone you love. If you want to be selfish about it. But be selfless. Know that no one should be treated this way. I love you, everybody. Yeah, that's how I'm signing off today on the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.